What do you actually own right now that you genuinely need? Not want. What do you actually need? The phone in your hand? Maybe. Some food? Probably. Clothes, because sometimes it's cold and there's societal rules about that. Maybe a place to sleep. That's pretty much it, right? Everything else, the car, the apartment full of stuff, the job that you hate that pays for the apartment full of stuff, the social performances you run every day to make other people think that you have your shit together is, if we're being honest with ourselves, mostly theatrical. It's all made up. Don't really need to do it. You agreed to the rules of the game before anybody even asked you if you wanted to play. You're performing them every day until you die. The man we're talking about this week figured all this out in approximately 380 BC and decided to just stop playing the game. He threw away everything he owned. He moved into a large ceramic jar in the middle of the Athens marketplace, publicly masturbated when the urge struck him, urinated on people who annoyed him, told the most powerful man on the face of the earth to get out of his sunlight, walked into Plato's classroom with a plucked chicken and threw it at him, and wandered around in broad daylight with a lantern telling everyone he was looking for an honest man. He was also genuinely one of the most important philosophers in Western history. The term cynic comes from this guy. The entire Stoic tradition, which produced Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, and runs through modern therapy and military philosophy, traces directly back to him. Friedrich Nietzsche was fascinated by this man. He influenced Thomas More, Erasmus, and a lot of the other enlightened thinkers. He did all this while living in a jar, eating garbage, and refusing to pretend that anything humans spend their whole life chasing actually mattered. Good shot, boy. You'll hit your father yet. That was Diogenes. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. This is a guy that I've had on my list to cover since before I even knew that this show was going to be a thing. He is fascinating and disgusting and hilarious all at the same time without even trying. And that's the point.
He don't give an F about nothing.
He didn't care. He didn't want to play the game. And he just found a way not to. So something to remember before we get into all of this. All of the crazy stories that we're about to go through are the philosophy that he came up with. They're not separate from it. Every single thing he did was the argument in favor of his way of life. Diogenes was born somewhere around 404 BC in Sinope, which is a pretty prosperous Greek trading colony on the southern shore of the Black Sea. It's in modern-day Turkey. Don't tell the Greeks that. They'll get upset with you. His father was a banker and the master of the city mint. They were a pretty well-off and very respectable family. Diogenes grew up with money and a really good education and the kind of like social standing that in 4th century BC Greece meant everything to your way of life. Your city, your family, your citizenship, that was your identity. You take those away, you're nothing. And then came the coin scandal. Now here's where sourcing gets a little murky. I'm going to be honest with you up front because it's been murky for like 2,000 years, okay? Something happened involving like the defacement of Sinopean currency. It was either his father that did it, or Diogenes that did it, or they did it together as a team. Physical archaeological evidence confirms that Sinopean coins from the period were actually defaced. Stamps were defaced. Coins were adulterated and messed with. This whole part is documented. We have proof of that. Why it happened, who ordered it, what the motivation was. Historians have been arguing about that since it happened. So we don't really know fully what caused it. What isn't argued about is that Diogenes was exiled from Sinope for this. He's kicked out of his home. He has his citizenship stripped. Everything that has built his entire identity for his whole life is gone because of this one incident with these coins. His response to this is one of the greatest one-liners in recorded history. When someone told him that the people of Sinope had condemned him to exile, he replied, quote, "Yes, and I have condemned them to stay where they are." That's great. It's like, nah, you get to stay there. I get to leave. So I have the advantage. First things first, his first stop, he goes to Delphi to consult the oracle, because why not? You're a philosopher. It's kind of the perfect thing to do. The oracle told him, quote, to deface the currency. And he took this quite literally and went back to Sinope and literally defaced more coins. Like, he spent the rest of his life defacing the currencies of human civilization to kind of like expose all of these different societal conventions and hierarchies and everything like that. He does this to prove that all of this is fiction and it's all counterfeit. None of it's real. The word he used for what the oracle told him to do is the exact word used to describe what he spent his entire life doing in Greek philosophy and in Greek society. Whether that's a coincidence or a story built backwards to make him look more prophetic, I don't really know. Either way, it's perfect for Diogenes. He arrived in Athens with essentially nothing to his name. So when he arrives in Athens in 380 BC, it's basically the intellectual center of the world. Plato's academy is there and operating. Socrates has been dead for about 20 years at this point, but his students are still everywhere arguing about everything, producing the kind of philosophical traditions that the entire Western world would be based on. If you were a thinker in the ancient world, all roads led to Athens, which at some point in time, they would be detoured to lead to Rome. But I'm not sure exactly when that happened. Wasn't here, though. Diogenes wanted more than anything to study under Antisthenes, who had been a direct student of Socrates and was the founder of what would become known as Cynicism. He was known for empathizing virtue over wealth, being self-sufficient over any other social status, and the idea that the only real good was moral character. It's a pretty strong baseline to set down, especially when you look at how the world is now, where we've kind of hit a point where there is a lack of morality from a lot of people, not just higher ups in governments and agencies like that, but with a lot of just general regular people. There's like a real moral Rubicon that's been crossed with a lot of things. Maybe just a personal view of mine. I don't really know. I like to think I've got a pretty good moral code, and there's a lot of things that I could do to get ahead in the world, but I don't, because it goes against my personal beliefs with things. He was also, by every account, not particularly interested in taking on new students. When Diogenes showed up and asked to be taught, he told him to go away. Diogenes, of course, because as we're going to learn a lot about this guy. He decided he's not going to go away. And he was told to go away again, and he still didn't. Eventually, Antisthenes raised his walking stick and threatened to hit him with it. Diogenes looked at the stick and said, quote, "Strike me if you wish, you'll never find a wood hard enough to drive me away from your teaching." After that, like, Antisthenes is just like, "Oh, this son of a bitch. All right, you're in." So he took him on as a student. From that point forward, Diogenes took everything Antisthenes had stated and pushed it further than his teacher had gone, or probably intended for anyone to go with it. Where Antisthenes advocated for simplicity and virtue, Diogenes decided to take that idea of living a very simple life and being virtuous by living in a big clay jar. Where Antisthenes criticized excess, Diogenes threw everything away, including basic, I'm not going to say human decency, but like societal decency. He took the philosophy of his teacher and drove it past every guardrail into the territory that like other Athenians genuinely were uncomfortable with, which is exactly why he did it. His full list of personal effects and possessions that he had when he arrived in Athens included a cloak, a walking stick, a bag for food, and a cup. Don't really need more than that. You can find shelter. You don't need money. You can just do whatever you want. Then, this is one of the funnier details with this whole thing. So he's got his cup for drinking. Then he saw a boy drinking water with his hands after he cupped him. He looked at the cup, he looked back at the boy's hands and went, I guess I don't need this, and threw the cup away. The boy had beaten him on a level of simplicity that he just couldn't let stand. I cannot be defeated by a child when it comes to living the simplest life possible, because I'm a grown-ass man, and I'm going to make that kid look like a punk by just outdoing him. I'm surprised he didn't just like cupped hands that and just like kneel down and just start sucking water out of a puddle like a dog. So back to his place of residency, his his mailing address, if you will. I'm sorry, it'd be his physical address. Sometimes they're the same. He chose a large ceramic pithos, which is a big storage jar, essentially the kind of thing that'd be used for like wine or grain, that he found in the Athenian Agora, which is a marketplace where most of the city's public life happened. It was kind of like the hub of the entire city. Think about like whatever city you live in. If you live in a city, you got this like one big ass intersection where you've got everything, right? You've got all your shops and stores, got a post office, maybe a court, who knows? Drop a big ceramic jar in the median of the turnabout right there, and that's where he would have lived. He didn't want a quiet corner somewhere. He set up right in the middle of everything, surrounded by merchants and philosophers and citizens going about their days. He lived there, he ate there, he slept there. He also performed every bodily function imaginable in that jar, or just out in public. The jar was not a retreat from the world, it was a front row seat to watch it happen. Before we get into the stories, and there are a lot of them, and they are all excellent, I kind of want to explain what he's actually doing, because if you don't understand the argument, the behavior just makes him look like a crazy person, which he very well could have been. I'm not going to make an argument that this guy wasn't insane, because he could have been. He probably was. But like those crazy people that are really, really smart, like the ones that go on to be billionaires and a bad day away from becoming a Iron Man villain. Not the last Iron Man reference I'm going to make this season, by the way. Diogenes believed that human beings have two sets of rules that they live by. Those are nature and convention. Nature is what we actually are and what we actually need. Convention is this whole elaborate performance that's just built on top of that to fit in with everybody else in society. Your like typical keeping up with the Joneses things like having property, having status, having money, manners, religion, functional government, family structures, the whole architecture that civilization is built on is not real. His argument was that convention has almost entirely replaced nature, and that people spend their entire lives chasing things that are completely made up, and that this is why almost nobody is actually happy. Oh my God, does that apply to modern society more than it did Athens before Jesus was around? Everybody want to be a TikToker. Everybody want to do a podcast. Damn. He'd hate me. He'd hate me. Crap. And he really thought that you can't be happy pursuing counterfeit goods, and that's really what a lot of human ambition is the rat race of trying to get ahead, trying to be better than your neighbor, trying to be better than the generations that came before you. The solution was to live entirely according to nature and to aggressively discard everything that wasn't supported by genuine reason. This is why he ate in the marketplace. Eating's natural, so why does the location matter where I eat? Why do I get yelled at if I eat lunch in my car? Why do I get yelled at if I sit down and eat an entire rotisserie chicken with my bare hands? Because I'm fat. Balls. I really do want to do that again. It's just like reconnects you with like the caveman Viking brain where you're just like, chicken, and you just like eat it like a pear or like a ear of corn. This is why he also performed other bodily functions in public. They're all natural. Maybe they're prohibited from doing them in public now, but that's all part of the convention side of it. This is why he pretty regularly fed the geese in public.
He was feeding the geese.
He jerked off a lot, like right on the street. That's where I was going with that. Just whenever he felt like it. Whenever the need struck him, he's just like, here's a good spot, and just starts, waxing the dolphin. Well, he famously remarked that he wished he could satisfy his hunger just as easily by rubbing his belly. Oh boy. If you could, holy shit, man. I love this dude so much. He's such a weirdo. Oh boy. He called himself a citizen of the world, which the word for that, cosmopolites, which is the first known use of that specific word. And if you can't put it together, that's the base word or the translation for cosmopolitan, which is a pretty regularly used word now. His point was that the entire concept of citizenship in a particularly city-state was artificial, and you're just drawing a box around a piece of ground that the powerful use to define who counts as a person and who doesn't. He'd had his citizen stripped before and found that, to his own surprise, that losing that didn't change anything about what actually mattered to him or about him. So citizenship is bullshit to him. Therefore, he's a citizen of the world, which is the same as saying citizenship is, again, a meaningless concept, which is the same as saying that all social structures and constructs built on citizenship are meaningless. He very well could have been the first of the most annoying people on the face of the earth. I'm not talking about vegans. I'm talking about sovereign citizens. If you don't know what those are, oh my God, a YouTube rabbit hole is in your future. Go watch Sovereign Citizens. They get pulled over all the time and refuse to show ID or insurance cards or registration because they're like, I'm traveling, I'm not driving, I'm traveling, and I follow maritime law on the road. And that usually results in, body cam footage of windows getting smashed out and people getting dragged through broken glass because they're being stupid. I don't care where you fall with law enforcement and all that, but sovereign citizens are just the worst. He was consistently, deliberately rude to powerful people and consistently and deliberately kind to dogs and children, who he considered the most natural and honest members of Athenian society. Can't argue with that. You want an honest conversation? Talk to a child, because they don't have the filter yet to not say things. And if you ever need to get some shit off your chest and you need somebody to listen to you, sit down and talk to your dog, because they'll just look at you. Okay, buddy. Okay. Oh, I get it. No, that totally makes sense. Dogs are some of the best people you'll ever talk to. And dogs were his particular mascot. They don't perform. They don't pretend. They don't put on a show for anybody to have them be accepted, because everybody likes dogs. And if you don't like dogs, seek therapy, go to church and figure out why you don't like dogs. They eat when they're hungry. They sleep when they're tired. They react honestly to everything. Hence the word cynic, from the Greek kynikos, which means dog-like. And he fully embraced that. Here's where we get to the good stuff. Most of these stories come from Diogenes Laertius, who was a writer who lived about 500 years after the Diogenes that we're actually talking about. And he compiled his whole biographical history from the sourcing that he could find at the time. Some of these stories are probably accurate. Some are probably bullshit. Some were probably completely invented to illustrate his philosophical place in the world after he was gone. And I don't care, because the stories are his legacy. They're what survived, and collectively they paint a pretty good picture of a man that was so consistent and so committed to the bit in his worldview that the portrait is true, even if the specific details aren't. Our first little story: he walked around Athens in broad daylight with a lit lantern. When people stopped and asked him what he was doing, he told them, quote, "I'm looking for an honest man, and I haven't found one yet." This wasn't a joke. This wasn't him just busting people's balls in public. This was his actual worldview, that the entire city of Athens, the most sophisticated civilization on the planet at the time, was so irreversibly corrupted by all these different societal conventions and performances that you needed a light in the middle of the day to find a single person that was living a genuine life. Again, kind of applies now. A lot. The lantern wasn't for seeing in the dark. It was because, in his view, everybody walking around him was already in the dark. This is this story. Oh, so good. He was walking through the city one day when he came across a boy throwing rocks at a cross. Again, this is back at a time when people were still being crucified as a death sentence. Diogenes watched for a moment as this boy's throwing rocks. The boy was the son of a pretty well-known prostitute, and obviously, being a well-known prostitute, good chance nobody knows who his father is. He then walked over, by all accounts, walked over to this kid, put his hand on his shoulder and said, quote, "Good shot, boy. You'll hit your father yet." Mean, dark, completely deadpan, and also a pretty logical observation that you don't know who you're throwing stones at. This kid just got treated like the world's first internet troll that says something and then gets completely ratioed in the comments. We're just like, haha, no, this is not going the way you planned it now, is it? His observation is that the kind of person who ends up being executed on a cross is exactly the kind of person who would raise a child to throw rocks at people for fun, because the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree after all. It's a one-sentence argument about character that's inherited from your parents and your environment, and he delivered it like a Chicago-style drive-by. This is Diogenes, at his most Diogenes. The joke is the entire point that he's trying to make. And then there's the whole incident with Plato. He's in a classroom one day, listening to Plato orate and give a speech. And Plato defined a human being as, quote, nothing more than a featherless biped. And this was considered a pretty reasonable and clever definition at the time. And Diogenes disagreed with it, specifically because it's the kind of bloodless characterization that he thought philosophers used to feel smart when missing the actual point of what they're trying to say. So he does the most logical thing he can do, and he goes to the market. And he bought a chicken, a live chicken. How'd he get the money? Don't know. I know he didn't sell any of his stuff for it. So he takes the chicken back to his home, his modest little clay pot that he lives in, and he plucked it while it was still alive. After plucking said chicken, he walks back into Plato's academy and throws the naked bird into the middle of the lecture hall while Plato's giving a speech and says, quote, behold, Plato's man. And then after that, Plato had to change his definition of a man by adding, quote, with flat, broad nails to his definition. Plato's description of Diogenes after this was, quote, Socrates had he gone mad. And he didn't mean this as a compliment. And Diogenes, of course, took it as one. Now, we're going to talk about an incident that he had with not even arguably the most powerful man on the planet at the time. Alexander the Great was visiting Corinth. He'd conquered most of the known world at this point. He's 20 years old, and everything he looked at, he owned. And he was fascinated because here is a man who seems completely unbothered by all of the things that Alexander has spent his entire life acquiring. And he wanted to go find him because he's heard stories. He's heard stories about Diogenes. He's like, I got to see this guy. I got to see what's going on here. So he gets directions, asks if anybody's seen him. He finds Diogenes laying in the sun in a public space near Corinth doing absolutely nothing. Alexander introduced himself and asked if there was anything he could do for Diogenes. Anything at all. I owe you a favor because you're an interesting character. Diogenes opened his eyes, looked directly at Alexander the Great, and said, quote, yes, get out of my sunlight. Alexander, to his credit, was not offended by this. He actually said, quote, if I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. Talk about two completely different sides of the spectrum. And this guy's like, if I wasn't the most powerful man on the planet, I'd want to be this guy that doesn't give a shit about anything. After hearing that, Diogenes replied and said, quote, if I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes. Because if you're going to want to be someone other than yourself, you may as well be the person who's figured out how to be happy. On another occasion, someone mentioned that a man named Callisyntheses was getting extraordinarily favorable treatment from Alexander. He's going to his place to breakfast. Alexander's taking him to Denny's, and they're drinking all over the place on his dime, traveling with the royal court. Diogenes said, quote, the man then is wretched, for he is forced to breakfast and dine wherever Alexander chooses. I love him. At a banquet for some of the Athenian elites, some of the guests threw Diogenes bones and referred to him as a dog. They thought that they were insulting him. So, since they called him a dog, he got down on all fours and pissed on their shoes. He regularly spat in the faces of wealthy men, having observed that their houses were too clean and too decorated for there to be anywhere else to spit. The men were so proud of their fine homes that they'd eliminated the only honest surface in them. And then there's the time that he decided to sail to Aegina. And he was captured by pirates and sold into slavery in Corinth. At the slave market, when asked what skills he possessed that would be helpful as a slave, he told them he knew how to govern men and suggested the auctioneer find someone who needs a master. He ended up being purchased by a man named Xeniades, who used him as a tutor for his children. And by all accounts, Diogenes was an excellent teacher. He's very patient with the kids, genuinely interested in furthering their education, and he's really good at helping them build character. He told his students that the most important thing was not what you knew, but how to live. The man who owned him eventually described him as a blessing to the household and said that a god had come to live with him and his family. His slave's name was Manes, and Manes eventually ran away. This is a slave that was owned by Diogenes, or gifted to him, or whatever. And he declined to pursue him, reasoning that if Manes could live without Diogenes, Diogenes could very certainly live without Manes. I want to address this next part directly because you kind of have to when you're talking about him. Yeah, of course, we already mentioned he masturbated in public, like, frequently. He considered this a philosophical position. His argument was that sexual relief is a natural bodily function and that there is no rational reason that it should be performed in private rather than in public, other than that the prohibition is purely, again, part of societal convention with no basis in nature or reason. Which is wild that the Greeks, and what we know about the Greeks at the time, of all the things that they did sexually, masturbating in public was frowned upon. Double standard, maybe, who knows. And then again, this is where the quote of wishing that he could satisfy his hunger as easily by rubbing his stomach. When people were obviously disgusted by this, he told them that he was merely rubbing his stomach. Different stomach, of course. Same principle, though. He also, on the same kind of grounds, would just shit and piss in public wherever he felt the need to. The people of Athens were not particularly thrilled about this, but also couldn't quite argue with him about it, which is exactly the point. You can be appalled all you want, but if you can't provide a rational justification for the rule, a reason beyond just, we don't do that here, then the rule is exactly what he's saying this whole time. It's just a convention with no substance. Then once he walked into... Then there's the time that he walked into the Athenian Senate during a formal session, pulled out a big bag of dried figs, and just started eating. The session was disrupted. Senators demanded to know what he was doing. He said he was eating lunch and asking if they had a problem with it. They said that he was in the Senate during an official proceeding, obviously. And his argument for this was, he said he noticed that no one was doing anything particularly useful and saw no reason to wait for his lunch. God damn it, this guy. This guy is just a human, like, stray dog, and he's so much fun. He also apparently wrote quite a bit, like dialogues, plays, and most notably his own version of Plato's Republic, which described what he considered to be an ideal society. By a lot of accounts, this would have been considered radical by even his own standards. Common ownership of everything, no formal family structure, children raised collectively, no money, no formal government, no distinction between Greeks and barbarians, between free men and slaves, between male and female. So he kind of loses me here because he's like right there. He's like right on the line of being in favor of communism or socialism, which at this point in time on the show, you kind of know where I fall on all of that. Because, yeah, this guy is fun to talk about, and he's fun because he's just like, we don't need rules. Rules are stupid. I don't like the whole collectivism thing. I think that's a really bad idea because, again, we've seen how that works, where we try that and, I don't know, hold on, ADD break. Dun, 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 dun. 23 different countries have tried communism, and in all but 5 have failed. But I mean, the 5 that are still run by communist parties, I'm not sure I would consider successful, other than China, because like China's kind of a big deal. The others would be Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam. So North Korea is a paradise, right? Everybody loves that. Anyway, he considered the city itself, the whole foundation of Greek civilization, an unnatural institute that corrupted everyone and everything aside from children and dogs in it. None of his writings really survived. Everything we know about what he wrote comes from other people's descriptions of it, which is either tragedy or pretty good evidence that he was right about the importance of how material things work. Diogenes died somewhere around 323 BC in Corinth. The precise cause is disputed. The precise cause is disputed across multiple ancient sources in a way that feels specifically designed to give you some options as to what killed him. He may have died of old age, which is what a lot of historians believe was actually the case, since at that point he would have been in his 80s. He may have died from eating raw octopus, which he apparently did as a philosophical demonstration that you could. He may have been bitten by a dog and developed an infection. We don't really know, which him dying from a dog bite kind of makes sense. I could see I could see him coming out of his clay pot with like a chicken carcass on the ground and a dog going after it, and him just grabbing the other end of it with his teeth and shaking it, trying to get the dog off, and the dog not liking that and biting him, and him going, "Ah, you son of a bitch," and biting the dog back. I could totally see that with this guy. Another option is he may have held his own breath and he may have held his own breath until he died, which is one of those stories that sounds impossible, but it's also completely within the realm of how Diogenes would have done things. Before he died, people asked him what he wanted done with his body afterwards. And he said, quote, "Throw it outside the walls for the dogs and animals to eat." His followers said that this was an undignified way to get rid of his body and his mind and all this. And he said, quote, "If you do that, leave a stick with me to beat the dogs away." They said that he'd be dead and couldn't use a stick, and he said, in that case, it wouldn't matter. He said, in that case, it wouldn't matter what the animals did then, would it? He'd previously established, when asked about being buried without proper ceremony after death, that a man of his wisdom shouldn't care what happened to his remains. The Corinthians, who had come to genuinely love and despise him in some cases, buried him with honors near the city gate. A bronze statue was erected. His hometown of Sinope, which had exiled him, eventually built a marble monument to him. On the base was inscribed, quote, "Even bronze grows old with time, but your glory, Diogenes, all eternity will never destroy you. You alone showed mortals how easy life is and how free of suffering for those who know how to live." So here's the thing about Diogenes that I kind of kept coming back to, is he wasn't just performing. This wasn't an act. This is entirely consistent across every recorded account for his entire life. There's no story where he broke character. To put it into wrestling terms, this dude never broke kayfabe once. He was in his gimmick the entire time. There's not a moment where the commitment to the bit lapsed. He gave up everything a normal person would die to protect: their status, their citizenship, their property, their comfort, their social appearance. And by all contemporary accounts, he was genuinely happier than everyone around him. Alexander the Great owned the world and said he would be Diogenes if he wasn't Alexander. That's remarkable for someone with that much power to say something like that about a man that lived in a jar and fought dogs for food. A man named Zeno of Citium, he was a follower of Diogenes. He was inspired by him and founded Stoicism, the philosophy that would shape some of the greatest minds of all time, including Marcus Aurelius. And this is still a method that runs through all of like behavioral therapy to this day. It's used a lot in modern military philosophy. It's the framework that helps humans deal with adversity in a lot of contexts, you know. Stoicism is essentially cynicism with the public masturbation toned down and some more systematic architecture added to it. But Diogenes is the root. The modern word cynical means something like jaded or distrustful or, you know, like that. That meaning has kind of drifted over the centuries. The original cynic, Diogenes, specifically wasn't necessarily distrustful of people. He is trying to wake them up. The difference between the modern meaning and the original is the difference between a man who's given up on humanity and a man who is so furious about the failures of humanity to live up to its potential that he dedicated his entire life to making that failure something that's visible to other people. He was born the son of a banker in a prosperous city. He died in a jar in a marketplace, having owned essentially nothing for 50 years. And again, the most powerful man on the earth wanted to be him if he could. The jar is not a punchline. It's the point being made through this entire story. So, man, it's kind of a little bit shorter of an episode, but so much fun. So much fun reading about all of these crazy stories and his insane life that I wanted to share it with everybody. I wanted to share it with the class because, again, this is not someone who, if you just went through high school or maybe even through college, unless you're going for philosophy, you may not have ever heard of this guy. And if you have, it's because he's insane in the best way possible. So much fun. Anyway, if you want to hear this story early, which you've already heard it early, if you're on Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. And I know how ironic it is to pitch this after just talking about a man who would have hated everything about my life. $5 a month gets you early access to History Goon, gets you early access to Guestnicity with Luther, gets you early access to all the shows that Sam does, like the Never Daily and 911 calls with the operator, gets you early access to my dear friends, David and Sarah over at Macabre Emporium, gets you early access to some of the new shows too, like True Crime Tradies, who are awesome because they're Australian and they're not allowed to not be awesome. They just are. And as a Bluey dad, I thoroughly enjoy listening to them talk. I don't even care what they're talking about. They could be just like sitting there reading a phone book to each other, and I'd listen to it because they have fantastic accents. I love the Australian accent. It ranks right up there with, for me personally, it's like top 5 with like American Southern, Irish, Scotch, Australian, and then, you know, maybe some other weird one that I've never heard before that I'd be like, oh, that's cute. I like that. But yeah, $5 is you get more content than you could shake a walking stick at. And if you want to support me personally to buy my clay jar to live in outside, I have a Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. Any money donated there comes directly to me as the creator, which is fantastic. I'm going to be very Diogenes about this because I'm not going to beg you for money. I'm just, if you give it to me, that's great. If you don't, that's great too. Live your best life. We're all going to die someday. So go out and leave a mark on the world. Do some goon shit. Just like Diogenes. Okay. Love you. Bye.